In this journey, I will never lie to you. I will never tell you something I do not believe.
Can you tell me now, honestly, have you kept to that promise at all times? Have you always been truthful?
Well, I try. I mean, I do try. I think you try, too. You say things about me that are not necessarily correct. I do try, and I always want to tell the truth. When I can, I tell the truth. I mean, sometimes it turns out to be where something happens, it's different, or there's a change, but I always like to be truthful.
That's what President Trump said back in November. Remember that? But he lies to the American people, and he lies all the time, and his lies have grown only more blatant, seemingly more compulsive and more damaging. We're going to fact check the president's lies again, which have helped drive the government shutdown into a third week. Now Donald Trump's art of the deal is an offer to substitute a wall the Democrats don't want with a different type of wall the Democrats don't want, and I believe 75% of Americans. And this is after the president rejected a deal last week that both Democrats and Republicans did want. Also this morning, National Security Advisor John Bolton is in the Middle East to try and tamp down concern over the president's hasty announcement on Syria. As Republican operative Mike Murphy noted on Twitter, you can tell that things at the White House have gone totally bat blank when the go-to guy for sober-minded adult foreign policy cleanup is Bolton. Wow. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, January 7th. With us, we have national affairs analyst for NBC News and MSNBC and co-host and executive producer of Showtime's The Circus, John Heilman, political writer for the New York Times and MSNBC political analyst Nick Confessori, former aide to the George W. Bush White House and State Departments Elise Jordan, and White House bureau chief at the Washington Post and political analyst for MSNBC and NBC News, Philip Rucker, is with us as well. Joe, what a way to start the week. There's so much going on and so many lies to cover.
Well, there really are. But I think more importantly, instead of just looking at the blizzard of lies that are at us right now, I think this government shutdown provides an opportunity to actually look at the foundation, not only of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, but Donald Trump's administration, his reason why he's president of the United States right now, and in fact, the state of the Republican Party, of Trump's Republican Party and conservatism. And it is based on a caravan of lies. You hear it, and we've heard it throughout the weekend. We've heard it over the past week. Again, this is a wonderful opportunity. When you hear your friends or your family members say, well, we have to build a border wall because of the 4,000 terrorists that are coming across the southern border. Well, that's a lie, and the president's administration's own stats prove that to be a lie. When you hear about all the illegal immigrants that are coming across, well, that's a lie. And you can look at government statistics to see that, in fact, the number is, as we say on this show, and we've been saying during the campaign, there's actually a negative net flow going back into Mexico. And Mika, you could literally go line by line by line. The president talking about applying for citizenship at the southern border. That's not where you apply for citizenship at the southern border. Their entire ruse of this wall, which we found out, in fact, was just a memory device so the president would remember to talk about illegal immigration. It's all a farce. It's all the little fat guy, behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Except this guy's no wizard. He's just a shameless TV reality show host turned demagogue. And our government shut down because of it. And I'll tell you what, our country is going in a dangerous direction because of it. And let's just go through the lies, Mika, that are, again, debunked by the president's own statistics.
Absolutely. They poured out of the administration all the lies since Friday. First of all, the reason why this is even happening.
We are nearly 2 weeks into a government shutdown. But our nation is also in the midst of a crisis on our southern border.
But the entire argument for a government shutdown is based on a fallacy.
I mean, the crisis on the southern border. Yeah, we had a crisis on the southern border when George W. Bush was president and when Bill Clinton was president, and the number of illegal immigrants kept skyrocketing. But that number went down through the Obama administration, and it's at its lowest point in a decade, Mika.
Well, the New York Times has reported that based off the government's own data, with slight variations from year to year, the number of people, it's not just from you, Joe, it's from the government's data, have either been apprehended or turned away at the southern border. It's actually decreased over the past decade. The Pew Research Center finds the number of unauthorized immigrants in the United States has fallen, according to the latest census data.
I want to stop there because
government data.
It's government data. John Heilman, we said it throughout the entire campaign. We talked about how Donald Trump's wall argument, and even Mike Pence lying through his teeth last week, and Mike Pence knows he was lying through his teeth last week when he talked about the crisis at the southern border, this caravan, this invasion of illegal immigrants. The number has gone down steadily over the past decade.
It has, and look, I mean, we've heard, there was been some good sound on this, Joe, over the last few days as people go back, as we are this morning to some extent, and looking at the foundations of not just the kind of edifice of lies of the Trump administration, but this particular big lie that's been at the core of his campaign. And Trump was on the record in 2016, basically saying, whenever one of my rallies seems to be flagging, whenever it seems like there's not enough energy in the room, I've discovered that the go-to thing, I just say build that wall, and it riles everyone up, and I get that, it sparks all this energy and enthusiasm in the room, and we all know that is the thing that it's it's Trump's erogenous zone, right? Which is the thing of he just gets all excited to hear everybody else get all excited, and this particular lie has the quality that he craves most, which is that it provides that instant dopamine hit he became wedded to it because it was so reliable on that front. And the facts in that case, as we know with all these matters related to Trump, the facts don't matter to him in those situations, and it continues to be the case that he holds it now very close for the same reasons.
And he even admitted, Nick Confessori, that when the audience started to get bored or distracted, when they seemed to wander off, he would bring back the wall, and he would talk about the wall because he said it was the best applause line. And what about his own people admitting to the New York Times that actually this was just a memory trick for him in 2014? They came up with the idea of a wall because they knew Donald Trump didn't like to read, or perhaps he doesn't know how to read. It's hard to say. But everybody around him says he never reads. So they came up with this trick that just say build that wall, and that would remind him to talk about illegal immigration.
Well, Joe, it's kind of astounding to imagine that we're here at this point right now to debate a solution to a crisis that isn't there by building something that we mostly have already, which is a steel fence along the border. And it goes to the point of how the president had won election by creating a sense of crisis, that our trade deals were terrible, that our country was getting screwed around the world with bad deals on NATO and trade, that there was a crisis at the border. He had to create that sense of crisis to win, and he has to keep the sense of crisis to keep his popularity from going even further down. And unfortunately, it's hard to govern if you're constantly trying to create a sense that there is a huge problem that can't be fixed. More importantly, Joe, this is really important. This is a man who said he was a great deal maker, that his virtuous president would be, I can make a deal. And the first time he has to make a tough deal with somebody who can't be pushed over, which is House Democrats in this case, he starts saying a state of emergency has to be called, right? Make a deal. Make a deal.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
No, he doesn't. No.
Both the president and the Secretary of Homeland Security tried to scare people that thousands of terrorists are pouring over the southern border.
We have terrorists coming through the southern border because they find that's probably the easiest place to come through. They drive right in and they make a left.
CBP has stopped over 3,000 what we call special interest aliens trying to come into the country on the southern border. Those are aliens who the intel community has identified are of concern. They either have travel patterns that are identified as terrorist travel patterns, or they have known or suspected ties to terrorism.
We're going to hand things over to Fox News' Chris Wallace for this fact check, which he did in real time with White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
We know that roughly nearly 4,000 known or suspected terrorists come into our country illegally. And we know that our most vulnerable point of entry is at our southern border.
I know this statistic. I didn't know if you were going to use it, but I studied up on this. Do you know where those 4,000 people come, or where they're captured? Airports.
Not always, but certainly a large number.
The State Department says there hasn't been any terrorists that they found coming across the southern border.
It's by air, it's by land, and it's by sea. It's all of the above. That the most vulnerable point of entry that we have into this country is our southern border, and we have to protect it. And the more and more that individuals
they're not coming across the southern border, Sarah. They're coming and they're being stopped at airports.
They're coming a number of ways. They're certainly, I'm not disagreeing with you that they're coming through airports.
Oh my goodness. So Elise Jordan, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the president's spokesperson, caught lying on Fox News. I think as troubling as that is, and obviously that's very troubling, more troubling is you have the person that's running the Department of Homeland Security standing next to the president in the Rose Garden, lying to the American people and the world about these 3,000, 4,000 people streaming across the southern border. Again, she knows it's a lie. She knows that her own statistics prove it out to be a lie. And so she's lying through her teeth for political purposes. What happens, Elise, when we have a real crisis and the American people are trying to figure out whether she's telling the truth about what we need to do next, or whether she's just lying through her teeth because she's a political sycophant?
Well, I'd argue that we're already at a real crisis point because of all the lies, because there is so much absolute nonsense that has no basis in factual reality emanating from official government sources who are paid by the American people. I really think that we need to give Chris Wallace his due respect for studying up on the frequently misused and abused facts that are spouted by these administration officials and giving it back to Sarah Huckabee Sanders in real time. And look at what she tried to do. She tried to still cast aspersions on it and say, oh, but by sea, or, you know, maybe they are coming by air. It was complete nonsense when confronted with the reality that, yes, most illegal immigrants are detained at airports, people usually overstaying their visas. And you know what? This government shutdown, it's really putting some pressure on TSA if you're actually concerned about border security.
You know, I don't know if we're desensitized, but there's something, you know, when the president's press secretary tries to spin, I guess that's one thing. Little chilling to see the head of the Department of Homeland Security lying about how people infiltrate this country or come in, literally lying for this president. The president of the United States also got this wrong.
Just remember human traffickers. Remember drugs. The drugs are pouring into this country. They don't go through the ports of entry.
Yes, they do, and the president's own drug fighting agency says so. According to the Associated Press, and the DEA said in a November report that the most common trafficking technique by transnational gangs is to hide drugs in passenger vehicles or tractor trailers as they drive into the U.S. through entry ports. So,
Philip Rucker, we've talked about, again, how the president's campaign was based on a lie, a trick. So he would remember to bring it up at campaign rallies, how his campaign was based on the lie, how this shutdown is based on the lie. What is next, though, for a Republican Party who's now the Trump Republican Party, which used to be about smaller government, balanced budgets, NATO, a strong defense against Russian and Chinese aggression? Now you see the minority leader standing there next to the president in the Rose Garden, being part of this caravan of lies. And that's actually become the basis of Abraham Lincoln's grand old party. How does that party win another election in the foreseeable future?
Well, Joe, the continued lying, the continuing of sort of creating this false narrative, creating this false reality around so many issues, we've seen it throughout the presidency. It hurts the credibility of the administration and of the Republican Party when they're trying to negotiate through a very real crisis, which this government shutdown is. The government is not open and fully functioning as it needs to be, and there's an inability for the administration to negotiate fairly on a common set of facts with Democrats in Congress. The other day, Speaker Pelosi had that briefing along with the other congressional leaders, and she had to interrupt Secretary Nielsen as she was presenting information about the border because she did not believe that the information coming from the Department of Homeland Security was accurate or credible. And so the lack of credibility in the administration, in the data points that the federal government is sharing on behalf of President Trump is creating a real problem for the Republican Party in solving any kind of solution that can get this government back open.
The president also said this about people in caravans from Central America who present themselves at the southern border.
They can apply for asylum, and they can, most importantly, they can apply for citizenship.
Oh my God!
Oh, no,
his statement shows how
how he is ignorant about just about everything that has to do with the federal government. According to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, you have to wait a year after you've been granted asylum to apply for permanent residency, a green card. After that, you must be a green card holder for at least 5 years to apply.
I'm not sure he cares
for
about
citizenship. No, there is a great video going around this weekend from a news site about Donald Trump saying, I know more about X than anybody. I know more about Y than anybody. Mika, time and time again, he knows less about, and this is his signature issue, he knows less about his signature issue than anybody out there on the stage, except for some people who still support him.
I don't understand, though, how he can get high-level cabinet members around him to lie for him. That part is chilling to me. Trying to justify the last 2 years, President Trump said this.
We've already built a lot of the wall. We've been working very, very hard.
Only he hasn't. No. The AP says Trump's claim is only supported when counting work done under past presidents.
So he's talking about the Obama wall.
And the fact that fences from prior administrations are not towering walls, he promised. He has, however, renovated some of the existing barrier. What he was really renovating was his signature campaign promise.
I said I was going to build a wall. I never said, I'm going to build a concrete. I said I'm going to build a wall.
Here he is saying exactly that.
I'll tell you what it's going to be made of. It's going to be made of hardened concrete. It's concrete plank. It's precast. Concrete plank. You have to be kidding.
In fact, just last week, the president wrote on Twitter, an all-concrete wall was never abandoned. Yeah.
Well, so John Heilman, we could keep going for 3 hours.
We could literally keep going all day.
Showing these lies. Though, again, we know Donald Trump's a liar, and we've known he's been a liar, and we know that he's lied about immigration. We know he's lied about the wall. We know he's lied about all of the statistics. We know he's ignorant about how people become citizens. Yeah. We know all of that. Yeah. I ask again the same question after the historic rout of Republicans in November as I asked before the historic rout of Republicans in November. And that is, why does this party continue marching over the cliff like lemmings behind a guy whose approval rating is about 40% on an issue where 75% of Americans oppose the president? 75% of Americans don't want the government shut down for his so-called phony wall. What comes next? At what point does Mitch McConnell say, hey, you know what? maybe we don't want to lose 10 Senate seats in 2020. Maybe I don't want to have to retire in 2022 early because I don't want to be minority leader for the rest of my life. Right. When does that happen, John? It's got to happen soon, or this Republican Party is reduced to dust.
Right. Well, let's be clear. I think the question you're asking illustrates the fact that the Republican Party at the intellectual, moral level has already been reduced to dust. It's not a question of whether it will be. It already has been. And this question that you have been asking, we've been talking about now for, at least the last year or so, illustrates exactly the point. The party is, the reason that they continue to follow Donald Trump is very simple. It's really straightforward. It's fear. And the fear is the fact that they believe that President Trump continues to dominate their party, and that his approval ratings within the Republican Party are sufficiently high that if they were to deviate from his course, however suicidal it is in any given instance, is that they will pay a price within the party. Mitch McConnell is a good example. Mitch McConnell sits every day and worries about all the long-term things you're talking about, but in the short term, what Mitch McConnell worries about is getting primaried in 2020. What happens if Mitch McConnell turns against Donald Trump? Mitch McConnell wonders, in a state like Kentucky, where Trump's approval rating among Republicans is north of 80%. That's Mitch McConnell's main concern. It's the concern of a lot of Republicans is they can see that Trump is driving them off the cliff, but they look at the short term and they fear not the general election in 2020, but they fear the potential that Trump and a Trump-backed candidate could primary them and beat them before they even got to November. Is that fear, panic, cowardice, stupidity? It's all those things, but it is the thing that I think has been the governing dynamic in Republican politics for the last year. When will it change? It will change when they start to look at the math, and the math changes enough that it costs them less to leave Trump than it costs them to stay with Trump in their judgment.
Well, I must say, if a Democrat had concocted that, well, actually, Donald Trump was a Democrat for most of his life, but if a Democrat, let's just say Donald Trump actually is a shrewd Democrat that wanted to destroy the Republican Party.
Perfect.
He could not have created a more effective political virus to tear through the GOP. And rip it to shreds. Sure. And have people afraid to stand up and fight for the values, Elise Jordan, that the Republican Party always stood for. Our Republican Party, the reason I went to Washington to fight Democrats is because I believed in balanced budgets, less debt, a smaller government, a strong, unified defense against Russian aggression and against Chinese communist aggression. These were the basics that we all believed in, that held us all together. Now, I didn't even talk about free trade. Now, none of this is part of what the Republican Party stands for anymore. Donald Trump has undercut every single one of those first principles of the Republican Party, and now it's about fighting for a phony wall.
Well, it's just amazing to me how many truly big government Republicans there are in the party. And after, about 8 years or so during the Obama years of hearing about cutting the deficit, cutting the budget, cutting spending, you have Republicans who really just seem to not care at all about the ballooning deficit. I think that the turning point for Trump, John's talking about how his popularity somewhere like Kentucky is at over 80%. With voters, the turning point is going to be if the economy really takes a nosedive. And if we go into a recession, you look at how things have been fairly steady, but Donald Trump's, the unpredictability is not helpful to the overall economy. And does it look like 2019 is going to be a year where Donald Trump is going to be a purveyor of steadier policies and is going to calm down his rhetoric when it comes to the Fed and other economic matters? I think that's doubtful. And so I think that the economy goes, a lot of those Republicans finally go too, because plenty of Republican voters will forgive Donald Trump for pretty much anything as long as the economy's doing well. But when the economy goes, so they go.
But Mika, I don't understand why, because they are following the biggest spending Republican, the biggest spending liberal in the history of this republic. The budget is bigger than it has ever been under any Democratic president. The national debt is bigger than it has been under any Democratic president. And it just keeps exploding by the day. These are not big government Republicans in Donald Trump's party. They're what we would have called big government liberals not so many years ago. And the question is, why are all of these Republicans?
What are they doing?
Why are they supporting big government liberals who call themselves Republicans?
They're under a spell. I don't know. It seems certain that President Trump is going to break his half-baked promise to build a wall on the southern border, paid for by Mexico. But here's yet another outlandish campaign promise he's already broken. Remember during the campaign how often Donald Trump said that he was a master negotiator, that he alone could break the logjams in Washington, that he alone could do what career politicians could never do. He could do it. This morning, most of the government of Washington, Madison, and Hamilton is closed from the American people. Hundreds of thousands of people are working without pay. Others are in danger of losing their tax rebates, their housing, even the support they need to put food on the table for their children. And yet this president has skipped many of the key negotiating sessions. And when he's been present, not a thing gets done. He insults his guests. He goes on profanity-laced tirades, obsesses about impeachment. Master negotiator? Ask the many Americans whose families are desperate for this shutdown to end what they think of Donald Trump's negotiating skills. Not much, I'd guess. Not much at all.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, Trump may soon have another flank he feels compelled to attack. Republicans who want this shutdown to end with or without the funding of the wall. We'll tell you who's breaking with the White House when Morning Joe comes right back.